I had never felt more cornered in my entire life. It was the bitter end of last winter, the kind of New York cold that gnaws through every layer, when my 6-year relationship detonated without warning. One evening, I was chopping onions and stirring a pot of pasta in the apartment my ex and I shared. The next, I was shoving clothes into garbage bags while she sobbed in the bedroom, her voice muffled through the door. My name wasn't on the lease. 2 weeks, that's what her landlord gave me. 2 weeks to find somewhere, anywhere to go. 2 weeks in New York City, in the middle of a pandemic. The problem wasn't just finding a place, it was finding one I could realistically afford. I was freelancing for a design company that had slashed my hours in half. Most landlords wanted 2 months' rent up front, plus a security deposit. I had maybe $1,400 to my name and no family within 5 states. I spent nights glued to my laptop, eyes burning, searching, Facebook housing groups, sketchy Craigslist ads, even throwing a plea into a Crown Heights subreddit. I wasn't picky. I just needed 4 walls and someone who'd split the rent immediately. That's when I got the message from Lena. "Hey, I saw your post. I can move in tomorrow. I'll cover half your deposit so you don't take such a hit. Only condition, I have a pet parrot. He stays in my room. You can't go in there, ever." I read it twice. A parrot. A locked room. Under normal circumstances, I might have hesitated, but these weren't normal circumstances. I texted back, "That's fine. As long as the bird doesn't scream all day, I'm good." She sent a quick reply. "He's quiet, I've trained him. I'll be out of the way, I've got night classes, philosophy major, small private school, probably never heard of it." Her messages were clipped, polite but strangely formal. She offered to meet in person, though she warned it would have to be quick. Something about the way she phrased things, detached, almost rehearsed, gave me pause. But I brushed it off. I couldn't afford to be choosy. The next morning, while I was out switching the Con Ed account and signing papers, she moved in. She texted around noon. "Settled. Taking a nap before class. Talk later." That was when the strangeness started. First, her schedule. She never came out during the day, not once. I work from home, and these walls are thin enough that you hear every little thing: water running, a phone buzzing. Our bedrooms shared a wall, so if she opened her door, I'd know. But every single night, like clockwork at 2:30 a.m., her door creaked open. Then the front door. She slipped out into the night and didn't return until just after 6. Always the same window of time. At first I thought maybe she had a night shift, but she never carried a work bag. Her shoes were spotless, never scuffed from walking in slush or grime. She didn't smell like bars, cigarettes, food service, nothing. Just stale air, like she hadn't been anywhere at all. And then came the smell. It started faint, almost dismissible, like fruit left too long in the back of a cabinet. But it deepened by the day, sour with a sharp metallic tang that clung to the hallway. By the 3rd day, it was impossible to ignore. I texted her, "Hey, do you smell that? Something might be rotting in here." Her reply was instant. "Nope. Smells fine to me." I stared at my phone, frowning. The smell was strongest right outside her door. It seeped through the floorboards, through the paint, into the air I was breathing. By the end of week 2, I couldn't take it anymore. I called maintenance. A guy named Marco came by, toolbox in hand. He was the type who'd seen it all. Nothing fazed him. But as he walked down the hall, right past her room, he slowed. His nose wrinkled. "Jesus," he muttered, glancing back at me. "What the hell is that?" "Smells like something died in here," Marco muttered, nose wrinkling. He rapped his knuckles on Lena's door, casual but firm. Her reply jolted me. Her voice was higher than I'd ever heard before, shrill, almost childlike. "I'm busy," she called from behind the door, "but I don't smell anything. You can check the rest of the vents." Marco shot me a look that said, "Your problem, not mine." Then shrugged and moved on down the hall. He checked the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom. Nothing. No dead animals in the ducts, no leaks, no gas issues. "I'll swing back later in the week, check the plumbing," he said, packing up his tools. That night, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to just assume anymore. I wanted proof of what she did at night. I brewed coffee, set myself up on the couch, and forced my eyes open as the hours crawled past midnight. At 2:29 a.m., right on schedule, her doorknob clicked. I held my breath as the door eased open. She stepped out in a dark coat and scarf, her hair shoved under a beanie. No glance in my direction, no acknowledgement that I was sitting there in the dim light of the TV. She just walked with quiet, deliberate steps to the front door, pulled it open, and slipped out. The latch clicked behind her, leaving me staring at the empty hallway. The next morning shattered any rational explanations I'd been clinging to. I stumbled into the kitchen half asleep, ready to make coffee, and froze. Sitting in the sink was a tooth. A human tooth. Not chipped or broken like it had just been knocked loose, whole with the root still attached. I snapped a picture and sent it to her. "This in the sink yours? Please tell me this is some kind of joke." Her reply came within seconds, a single laughing emoji. I stared at my phone for a full minute, stomach twisting, before I typed back, "Can you come get it? It's freaking me out." Hours later, another reply buzzed through. No explanation, no apology, just, "I'll take care of it." But she never did. The smell by then was unbearable, thick and sour, coating the air no matter how many candles I lit. I kept the windows cracked even though February air burned like knives. I couldn't eat in the apartment anymore. When I left for errands, the stench clung to my clothes, following me like a shadow. And there was something else now. Sounds. Late at night, through the walls, I'd hear soft clicking. Not the fluttery chatter of a parrot. This was deeper, slower. Sometimes it was like glass tapping against stone. Other times it was more organic, like fingernails dragging across wood. Then one night, around 4 a.m., I woke to whispering. I lay completely still, barely breathing, ears straining. It wasn't loud enough to catch the words, but steady and low, like two voices murmuring at the same time. And it was coming from behind our shared wall. I didn't sleep again until sunrise. 3 nights ago, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until evening when I figured she'd be awake and walked down the hall. My hand trembled as I knocked. "Lena," I called, trying to sound firm. "We need to talk about this smell, and about the tooth." Silence. I knocked harder, fist against the wood. "I'm serious. This isn't normal. Whatever's going on, I need you to be honest with me." The door creaked slightly, not open, just enough that I could hear her voice slide through the gap. "I told you not to come in here," she said softly. Calm. Too calm. Her tone crawled under my skin. "I'm not trying to invade your privacy," I answered quickly, my throat tight. "But this is my home too." Something slammed against the door with a violent thud, so hard I stumbled back a step. "Leave me alone." That night, for the first time, she didn't leave at 2:30. I sat up waiting, eyes locked on her door. But it never opened. Around 5, exhaustion finally dragged me under. When I woke on the couch, dawn light creeping through the blinds, the smell was suffocating. It coated the apartment like a film, and sitting in the middle of the kitchen table where I'd left my laptop was another tooth. That was it. I packed a bag and went to crash at a friend's place. 2 nights later, I went back for clothes. The apartment was silent, the air stale. Lena's door stood wide open, for the first time since she moved in. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The room was empty. No bed, no furniture, no bird, no Lena. Just the floor, covered in dozens, maybe hundreds of teeth, arranged in careful concentric circles. Some tiny, unmistakably belonging to children. Others yellowed, cracked, old. And on the far wall, written in something dark and rusty, were 5 words. "You shouldn't have looked." I turned and left without touching a thing. When I went to the leasing office, shaking, they pulled up the sublet paperwork. The manager frowned at the screen. "There's no record of anyone named Lena ever signing here." I never thought I'd end up sharing a flat again. Back in 2015, after a nightmare university house share, I'd promised myself I was done. That place had been chaos, unpaid rent piling up, food vanishing from the fridge, and worst of all, one flatmate's cat deciding my duvet was its personal litter tray. After that, I swore off the whole idea. Next time, I told myself, I either live alone or I don't bother. But life has a cruel way of making you break your own rules. By late 2019, I'd been offered a teaching assistant job in Nottingham, the best news I'd had in years. The pay, though, wasn't much to brag about. I checked my account, a little over $1,300, and 2 weeks to find a place before term began. I viewed a string of one-bed flats, and every single one was either crawling with mold, buried somewhere 30 minutes from the nearest bus stop, or miles beyond my budget. That's when I saw the ad. Double room and shared flat, $370 PCM, bills included. The listing had just 3 photos: a bright little kitchen, a sparse lounge with a sofa and table, and a bedroom that looked surprisingly tidy. It was in Sherwood, right on the bus route I needed. I rang the number immediately and arranged a viewing for that evening. The building was a Victorian terrace split into 3 flats. The one I'd be viewing was on the top floor, reached by a steep, narrow staircase with a carpet that smelled faintly of old cooking oil. When I knocked, the door opened to a young woman with dark hair piled into a messy bun. She was barefoot, drowning in an oversized jumper but smiling warmly. "You must be Erin," she said. "Come in, I'm Ellie." The flat was warmer than I expected. The hallway was narrow but clean, the walls lined with framed prints of abstract shapes that made the place feel lived in. A ginger cat padded in, fixed me with an unimpressed stare, then slipped away into a room at the back. Ellie led me to the lounge, where another person sat slouched on the sofa. "This is Dan," she said. Dan glanced up, muttered a quiet, "Hey," and gave a short nod. Early 30s, wiry build, hair cropped tight. Something about him seemed guarded, but I told myself it was probably just shyness. Ellie showed me the rest of the flat, the kitchen, dated but tidy, the bathroom, small but fine, and finally the room I'd be renting. It wasn't big, but the sash window flooded it with light. At the far end of the hallway, opposite what I gathered was Dan's room, was a closed door. I tilted my head toward it. "Oh, that's just storage," Ellie said quickly, almost too quickly. "Landlord stuff. We don't have the key." I shrugged it off. I'd lived in houses with locked cupboards full of forgotten junk before. Nothing unusual. I took the room. The first couple of weeks passed without trouble. I was busy with the new job, usually out before either of them woke and stumbling back after dark. We mostly crossed paths in the kitchen or lounge. Ellie was easy to like. She worked part-time at a charity shop, was doing a master's in social work, and always seemed halfway through a novel. She had a quick laugh, brewed the kind of coffee that made the mornings bearable, and was effortlessly kind. Dan was harder to figure out. He worked night shifts at a warehouse, which meant we rarely saw each other. When we did, he was polite but clipped, his answers always short. One evening, when Ellie and I were sharing pasta and cheap wine, I asked about him. "He's been here for years," she said, lowering her glass. "Honestly, I don't think he likes change much. When I first moved in, he barely spoke to me for months. Now he at least says hi." She grinned. "Give it time. If you're lucky, he might even ask how your day was by Christmas." I laughed, but her words lingered. It was a Tuesday night when I first noticed something odd. I'd stayed up late in the lounge, stacks of exercise books spread across the coffee table, the only light coming from the lamp beside me. Around midnight, I heard it for the first time. A sound down the hallway. At first I thought it was the cat knocking something over, but this wasn't light or clumsy. It was heavier, more deliberate. A slow scrape across the floorboards. A pause. Then another scrape. It seemed to come from the far end near the so-called storage room. I muted the TV, leaning forward, listening hard. The sound stopped as soon as the flat fell quiet. I waited, every nerve stretched tight, but nothing followed. After a minute, I exhaled and told myself it was just the building settling. The place was old, Well over 100 years. Timber creaks. Pipes groan. That was all. I switched everything off and went to bed, though I lay awake longer than I'd admit. The next morning, over toast, I casually asked Ellie if she'd heard anything strange in the night. "Nope," she said, spreading butter without looking up. "Dan wasn't in last night, if that's what you're thinking. Probably just the pipes. They sound like they're alive sometimes." I let it go, though the unease clung to me. A week later, I was heading to the kitchen to make tea when I noticed something that made me stop. The storage room door, always closed, always locked, was standing slightly ajar. Not wide, just an inch or two, enough to show a sliver of blackness inside. I frowned. Maybe Ellie had gone in there. Maybe the landlord had come by and left it cracked. Over tea, I asked her. "It was open this morning," I said carefully. "The storage door." Her brow furrowed instantly. "No way, it's locked, always is." "Are you sure? I could have sworn—" "I don't even like going near that thing," she cut me off. "It gives me the creeps." That evening, when I got home, the door was firmly shut again. The next incident came about a month after I'd moved in. I woke around 3 a.m. to a faint noise. 3 soft knocks. A pause. Then 3 more. My heart thudded in my chest. It was coming from the hallway. I sat up, straining to listen. After a few moments, I forced myself to get up, opened my door, and peered out. The flat was silent. Dan's door was shut. No movement, no knocks. I stood there until the silence pressed too hard against me, then went back to bed, convincing myself it had been a dream. The following night, it happened again. The same pattern of knocks, only this time it was followed by something else. A whisper. Too faint to make out words, but the tone was urgent, desperate. A few days later, I caught Dan in the kitchen making tea. He looked worn out, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Weird question, but you ever hear knocking at night, down near the storage room?" He froze for the tiniest fraction of a second, then went back to stirring his mug. "Old houses make noises." "Yeah, but this sounded like, I don't know, like someone knocking." He didn't answer, just kept stirring, then left the room with his tea without another word. After that, the noises became more frequent. Not just knocks anymore, but dragging sounds, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Sometimes I could swear I heard breathing. One Sunday afternoon, Ellie went out shopping and Dan was at work. The flat was quiet, too quiet. I walked down the hall, stopping in front of the storage door. After a long hesitation, I pressed my ear to the wood. At first, nothing. Then, shuffle. A faint shift, like someone moving just out of reach. And then, soft as breath, a low voice. "Help." I stumbled back so fast I nearly tripped, heart hammering. I didn't go near that door again for weeks. 2 weeks later, I came home earlier than usual and found Dan in the hallway. He was standing at the storage door, a small brass key in his hand. I must have startled him because he spun around, eyes wide. "Just grabbing something," he said quickly. "Landlord asked me to check the window in here." Before I could say anything, he slipped inside and shut the door. When he came out minutes later, he locked it again without looking at me and brushed past down the hall. By early December, things came to a head. Ellie had gone to visit her family. Dan was supposedly at work, though his coat still hung on the rack by the door. I was in my room reading when I heard it, the creak of the storage room door opening. I froze, book slipping in my lap. Slowly, I stepped into the hallway. The door was wide open. From inside came shuffling, then a whisper, clearer this time. "Please." Against all reason, I moved closer. The air smelled of damp and something metallic, sharp enough to sting my nose. In the dim glow of the streetlight filtering through the grimy window, I saw it. A figure. They were painfully thin, clothes filthy and hanging off their body, hair matted into clumps. A chain ran from their ankle to a bolt in the wall. Their face lifted, eyes hollow and sunken, locking onto mine. "Don't let him lock it again," they rasped. Behind me, a floorboard groaned. I spun around. Dan stood there, expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be in here," he said softly. Something in his tone made my blood turn to ice. I bolted. Out the flat, down the stairs, into the freezing December night. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, lungs burning. The next morning I packed and left. I didn't call the police. Even now I can't explain why. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the gnawing feeling that I didn't really want to know the full story. But sometimes, late at night, I still dream about that voice in the dark, and I wonder if anyone ever opened that door again. I never pictured myself crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment on the dusty edge of Las Vegas with someone I barely knew. But the summer of 2016 left us little choice. That heat was suffocating. Triple digits every single day. The air so dry it burned my throat and split my lips no matter how much water I swallowed. I was 20, pulling closing shifts at a strip mall coffee shop off Sahara Avenue, stumbling home after midnight with my clothes smelling of espresso and burnt milk. My boyfriend Lucas was 21, working long nights as a security guard at a small casino downtown. Neither of us made enough to stand on our own. Rent only balanced because of Leah and Travis, the couple who'd been our roommates for almost a year. They were good people, the kind you actually wanted to share space with. Easygoing, funny, respectful. No passive-aggressive notes on the fridge, no drama. Honestly, they were perfect. Then they dropped the news. Travis had landed a job in Denver and they were moving. They gave us 6 weeks' notice, which sounded reasonable on paper. But in Vegas, finding decent, trustworthy roommates who weren't sketchy gamblers or party fiends was like trying to win a slot jackpot. Our place was in a gated complex on the west side, stucco buildings painted the color of sun-bleached clay. Quiet, a little removed from the strip. And for most people who answered our ad, that distance was apparently a deal-breaker. They'd message with interest, then ghost us. A few actually came for a viewing, smiled, and then vanished without another word. 2 weeks before Leah and Travis packed up, panic set in. Rent was looming and the numbers didn't lie. Without new roommates, Lucas and I were screwed. That's when Kayla messaged us. She said she was looking for a room, for her boyfriend Eric. She came off friendly enough, casual, like she'd done this before. She insisted Eric was easygoing, the kind of guy who liked to keep to himself. On paper, it sounded promising. But the second they showed up, my stomach tightened. I don't usually get that kind of gut reaction. I try not to be judgmental about appearances or first impressions. Still, sometimes there's this charge in the air, like static before a storm. And when Eric stepped into the apartment, tall but lanky, eyes darting too fast, wearing this cocky grin like he was already in on a joke I wasn't, I felt every instinct in me flare up. Wrong. That was the only word that crossed my mind. Wrong. Lucas didn't seem bothered. He actually laughed when Eric cracked some dumb joke about the desert heat frying his brain. Kayla explained that Eric had just moved back from Oregon, trying to get back on his feet. She did most of the talking, smiling in this rehearsed way that almost convinced me. And with the rent deadline breathing down our necks, my protests never made it past my throat. We told them the room was his. He moved in that Friday. At first, he was gone more than he was around. Long stretches where his room stayed dark, only for him to stumble back smelling faintly of weed and something sharper. Booze, maybe. But sometimes it was harsher. Chemical. Over the weeks, that changed. Suddenly, Eric was hosting people. At first 1 or 2, then 5, 6, all piling in after 10 at night. Music rattled our bedroom wall, bass thumping through the drywall until I could feel it in my chest. Sometimes glass shattered, followed by laughter, then silence, then another burst of noise. I'd bring it up to Lucas, who would just rub his eyes and mutter, "It's not worth a fight. We need him here for rent." I wanted to believe him, but the way Eric looked at me when we crossed paths made my skin crawl. His comments always landed sharp. mocking my job at the coffee shop, smirking if I asked even casual questions like what his work hours were. One night, after yet another round of pounding music, I finally knocked on his door. My voice was calm, careful. "Hey, could you maybe turn it down a little? We've got work in the morning." He didn't answer right away, just leaned against the door frame close enough that I could smell the bitter edge of whatever he'd been drinking. His grin never reached his eyes. "Careful," he said softly, tilting his head like he was studying me. "I don't like being told what to do." The words weren't loud, but they landed like a warning. His grin that night hadn't touched his eyes, and after that, I started double-locking my bedroom door before bed. It became a ritual. Turn the bolt twice, test the knob, listen to the click. A small layer of protection that felt flimsy in the face of someone like Eric. Things boiled over one Wednesday in late August. I just finished a draining shift at the coffee shop, skin sticky with sweat from the walk to my car, and pulled into our complex around 5:30 p.m. The desert sun was still punishing, blinding orange over the rooftops. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor, and as I trudged up, I saw Eric coming down. He was moving quick, head down, almost like he didn't want to be seen. Then his eyes caught mine, and he stopped abruptly. "You see the place?" he asked, his voice clipped. I blinked at him. "What? Someone broke in?" His words were too sharp, too sudden. I glanced toward our open door. From where I stood on the breezeway, everything looked untouched. The blinds were straight, the couch where it always sat. What are you talking about?" Eric motioned toward the apartment, jerking his chin. "Go look." Unease prickled up my spine, but I stepped inside anyway. At first glance, nothing was out of place. The furniture was fine, no drawers pulled, no cushions tossed around. "Looks fine to me," I muttered, shrugging. Eric narrowed his eyes, leaning forward. "You're not looking close enough." Something in his tone made me turn toward my room. The moment I stepped inside, my stomach dropped. The entertainment shelf looked wrong. Empty space stared back at me where my Wii U should have been. My PS4 and Xbox were still lined up, controllers neatly stacked where I'd left them. But the Wii U was gone, like it had been surgically lifted out of my life. "You too?" Eric said from behind me. "They took my PS4. It should have sounded frustrated, angry, but his tone was flat, almost rehearsed, like he'd practiced saying those words. A chill ran through me. I didn't answer him. Instead, I fumbled for my phone and called Lucas. "How close are you to home?" I asked, my voice tight. Eric cut in smoothly, too smoothly. "I already called the cops. They're on their way. Do whatever you need to do before they get here." That was the moment I knew. He'd been inside the whole time. That do whatever you need to do wasn't casual. It was something someone said to clear their own name, to prepare themselves before eyes were on them. Within minutes, 2 LVMPD officers pulled into the lot, arriving just as Lucas rushed up, face pale. One officer went upstairs with him and Eric to make a list of what was missing. The other stayed with me in the breezeway, notepad in hand, asking questions. I told him honestly. I didn't know Eric well, but he had guests all the time, loud music every night, people I didn't recognize coming and going. When Lucas came back down, he looked shaken. More was gone than just my Wii U, his laptop, our 3DS, a pile of games. All vanished. Eric's missing list? Just his PS4. I asked the officer, "Can you search Eric's car? If you want, you can search ours too." The cop nodded and asked Eric for consent. Eric said yes, but first he needed his wallet and keys. Lucas and I trailed him up the stairs, watched him grab the wallet, jingle the keys, and walk out the door. We assumed he was headed down with the officers. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No sign of him. When the officers finally went to check, Eric was gone. His car was still in the lot, but unlocked. They opened it, and inside was almost everything we'd reported missing. My Wii U, our games, Lucas's laptop, even a PS4 controller that Eric hadn't claimed was stolen. The officers wrote up a report, but their words were frustrating. Since we'd recovered the items, and Eric had technically consented to the search, the DA might not press charges. Lucas clenched his fists, furious. All I could do was sit there, staring at the pile of our belongings spread across the hood of a squad car, feeling violated. The next morning I called a locksmith and had every lock changed. I gathered Eric's leftover junk, clothes, shoes, random scraps, and stuffed them in garbage bags. I left them by the dumpster like they were rotten food. We never saw him return for any of it. 3 weeks later, though, Lucas spotted something from the window. Eric's car idling across the street, headlights off, engine humming. He just sat there. 10 minutes passed. We stood inside, phone in hand, 911 ready to dial, watching the silhouette of a man we'd barely let into our lives. Finally, the car pulled away, disappearing into the desert heat haze of the night. That was the last time we saw him. Sometimes, I replay it. How close we came to letting him settle in deeper. How easy it was to ignore that first gut instinct. One bad decision, one moment of hesitation, and it could have been far worse than a stack of stolen electronics. If you ever get that feeling about someone, that deep crawling sense that something isn't right, don't ignore it. It's your only warning. I never thought I'd share a place with a stranger again. After my last roommate ditched me halfway through the lease, leaving me to scramble for rent I could barely manage, I swore I'd stick to living alone, even if it meant surviving on instant noodles 5 nights a week. I told myself it was better to be broke than blindsided. But life has a cruel way of cornering you. By late August, Portland's heat was suffocating, and my bank account was emptier than my fridge. My part-time job at the print shop barely stretched enough to cover utilities. Rent loomed like a guillotine. I had maybe a month before I'd lose the apartment altogether. That's when I found the listing. Room available, $500 a month. 2-bedroom near downtown. Must be okay with cats, no smokers, month to month. $500 for a place within walking distance of work felt like winning the lottery. The ad had one blurry photo. A living room with a faded green couch, an old oak coffee table, and not much else. No description beyond a name and number. Just Leah. I called that night. Her voice was soft, almost careful. Hi, yeah, the room's still available. Do you want to come by tomorrow? The next evening after my shift, I biked across town. The building was old brick, second floor. The kind with narrow hallways that held onto the smell of dust and something faintly metallic, like pipes bleeding rust. Leah opened the door barefoot, wrapped in an oversized cardigan even though the heat was unbearable. She was tall, maybe 5'11", with pale skin and hair so dark it glinted blue under the hallway light. Her eyes lingered on me just a beat too long before she gave a small, faint smile. "You're Daniel?" "Yeah. And you're Leah?" She nodded and stepped aside. The apartment was tidy, too tidy. No dishes in the sink, no magazines stacked on the coffee table, no random junk shoved into corners. Just clean surfaces and a few framed black and white photos on the walls. Landscapes mostly, though one looked like an old portrait blurred with time. She led me to the room. Small but bright. A single window overlooking the street below. I knew I'd take it before she even finished speaking. "Rent's due on the 1st of the month," she said quietly, almost like she was repeating something she'd practiced. "We don't really have guests over, it's just easier that way." I agreed to everything on the spot. The first week passed without incident. Leah kept to herself. We'd cross paths in the kitchen, trade a quick hey or morning, then retreat back into our separate corners of the apartment. She had a habit of disappearing into her room the second she got home from work. Sometimes faint music drifted through her door. Old folk songs, the kind that sounded like they were recorded on warped vinyl a lifetime ago. It wasn't until the second week that things began to feel off. One night, just after 9, there was a knock at my door. Leah stood there holding a pizza box. "I ordered too much," she said, smiling, though her eyes didn't quite follow. "Want to split it?" We sat in the living room. I ate most of the pizza. She picked at her slices, barely touching them. Instead, she leaned forward, asking me one question after another: where I grew up, whether I had siblings, what my parents were like. Her voice was steady, but the way she watched me made it feel less like conversation and more like she was studying me, cataloging pieces of my life and tucking them away somewhere behind her eyes. Every time I tried to ask her something back, she either shut it down with a one-word answer or redirected the conversation back to me like she wasn't interested in being known, only in knowing. At one point, she tilted her head and studied me, her stare dragging on just a second too long. "You know," she said softly, "you remind me of someone I used to know, exactly like him." I gave an awkward smile. "An old friend?" Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Something like that." Over the next few days, her behavior shifted. She started greeting me at the door when I came home, as if she'd been standing there listening for my footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes she'd compliment me in oddly specific ways. "That shirt looks good on you," she'd murmur. "You should wear green more often. It brings out your eyes." At first it was flattering, but after a while, I realized she repeated the same phrases word for word, like she'd practiced them and was running through a script. Then came the nights. I'd wake around 2 or 3 a.m. to faint giggling through the wall, high-pitched, almost childlike, completely out of place in the dead stillness of the apartment. The first time I told myself she was watching something on her laptop, but it happened again and again, night after night. Sometimes the sound went on for hours, until the sky outside turned pale. By the third week, things escalated. I was on the couch watching Gladiator when Leah stumbled out of her room. Her eyes were glassy, her cardigan hanging off one shoulder. She hovered in the hallway, staring, before suddenly blurting out, "Do you want to hear about my ex?" The question was so abrupt I almost laughed, but her expression was deadly serious. Sure." She dropped onto the couch, tucking her legs under her body. Then she launched into a story in this rushed, uneven tone, words tumbling over each other. Something about betrayal, about lies, about how people never change. Her voice climbed until she was practically shouting, the pitch cracking, until suddenly she spat out, "I should have slit his throat." My heart stopped, my body locked in place. "What?" I asked. She blinked, like she'd just remembered I was there. Then her mouth stretched into a smile, and out came that same high-pitched giggle I'd been hearing through the walls. "I'm just kidding," she said. But her eyes never left mine. They stayed locked on me a beat too long, unblinking. That night, I shoved my dresser against my bedroom door. I told myself I was overreacting, but my gut said otherwise. Around 3 a.m., a sound jolted me awake. Scraping. Slow. Deliberate. Wood dragging against wood. My blood ran cold. The dresser was moving. I scrambled for my phone, turned on the light, and through the slim crack of the doorway I saw her face. Leah, standing there, eyes wide, lips pressed into a thin line, like I'd caught her in the middle of a thought. "Leah, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted. She didn't answer at first. She just swayed slightly in the hall. Then, in a low whisper, she said, "You left the light on." Her words slurred, but her gaze was razor sharp. "Go to bed, Leah," I ordered, my voice shaking. Eventually, she turned and shuffled back down the hall. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I opened my door and froze. Lying on the carpet just outside my room was a kitchen knife. My stomach dropped. Her words from the night before slammed into me. I should have slit his throat. When I confronted her, she tilted her head like she was genuinely confused. "I don't remember coming into your room," she said softly. "I don't even remember talking about my ex." The way she said it made my skin crawl. She sounded like she believed it, or like she wanted me to believe she believed it. I moved out 3 days later. No argument, no goodbye. The lease was month to month. I packed everything into my car and left without looking back. 2 weeks after that, I went to the movies with some friends. When I turned my phone back on, there were 47 unread messages from Leah. The first few were harmless. "Hey, how's the new place? Did you leave your hoodie here?" Then they shifted. "I miss talking to you. Why are you ignoring me? You're just like him. I hate you." I blocked her number that night. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed half asleep, I swear I can still hear it, the faint, high-pitched giggle drifting through the dark. I never thought I'd end up crammed into a small New York City apartment with someone I barely knew. But by 2018, my choices were gone. I'd just finished 6 months in outpatient rehab for a pill problem that had eaten years of my life. My parents loved me, but they'd drawn their line. No moving back home until I could prove I was steady. I didn't have the savings for my own place, and every Craigslist post in my budget was either a scam or meant sharing a living room floor with 5 other strangers. That's when I saw Melissa's ad. It was blunt. 1 bedroom in East Harlem, $850 a month. Must be clean, respectful, pay on time. No couples, no drama. Not exactly a dream, but it was within reach, and when I messaged, she replied within an hour. We agreed to meet the next day. Melissa was mid-30s, light brown hair brushing her shoulders, always wrapped in oversized sweaters like the cold followed her everywhere. Her sentences trailed off in this hesitant way like she was holding something back at the last second. The place was tiny but spotless. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a narrow kitchen, a living room just big enough for a couch and a small TV. Honestly, I was so desperate I would have said yes even if she'd been hiding a pet alligator in the tub. She didn't pry into my past, just asked if I could pay first and last month's rent. 2 weeks later, I moved in. At first it was fine. We weren't friends, but we coexisted. She'd leave Post-its on the fridge. Out late, leftovers in fridge, or please don't touch my almond milk. I got a part-time warehouse job in Queens. Garbage pay, but honest. I kept my head down, went to NA, tried to build a life that felt normal. Then, a month in, things got off. It started with the bathroom door. I'd come home from work, try to shower, and the damn door wouldn't open. Locked from the outside. Melissa would wordlessly unlock it like it was nothing. When I asked why, she shrugged and said, "Habit. I grew up with siblings, had to protect my stuff." Weird explanation, but I let it slide. Then the food. I'd stock basics, eggs, bread, peanut butter, and half would vanish within days. When I asked, she stared at me and said, "You probably ate it and forgot." That stung more than she knew. Forgetting things was the exact version of myself I was clawing away from. One night around 2 a.m., I went for water and saw her on the couch, sitting in pitch dark. No TV, no lights, just staring at the window. Hey, I mumbled, half asleep. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, just stared. By month 3, I told myself I'd start looking elsewhere. But the rental market was brutal. I stayed. And that's when things tipped. It was a Tuesday. I got home and found Melissa in the kitchen with a tall man in his 40s, heavy coat zipped to his throat even though it was warm. The second I walked in, their conversation died. She introduced him as Tom, an old friend. He nodded, no smile, then left. When I asked later, she said, "We go way back," and locked herself in her room. That night I heard them arguing through the wall, fragments about money, and, "I can't keep covering for you." The next morning she was gone. No note, no text. When she returned the next evening, she looked wrecked. Hair greasy, sweater sleeves pulled over her hands, reeking faintly of booze. I didn't press. Not my business, I told myself. But 2 days later, it became mine. I came home to find my bedroom door lock broken, wood splintered. My chest went tight. Inside, nothing obvious was missing. Laptop still there, wallet untouched. But my dresser drawers were open. My NA book lay on my bed, pages bent like someone had been thumbing through it. Melissa claimed she accidentally knocked it while cleaning, and the lock just fell apart. Bullshit. That night, I shoved a chair under the knob before bed. Over the next week, her mood swung wildly. Some days chatty about bakeries or rent, other days slamming her door if I said hello. Then came the night I woke to my door creaking open. The chair scraped softly against the floor. Heart hammering, I whispered, "Melissa?" A shadow stood in the doorway. Silent. Motionless. My eyes strained in the dark. After what felt like a full minute, the figure backed away, slow, deliberate. Then I heard her door close. The next morning, I asked her. She laughed, actually laughed. Must have been a dream. My gut said calling her out would only make things worse. I started searching for new places every day, but in New York, safety doesn't matter. Only money. I was stuck. Then came the Thursday in late October. I got home from work, and a knock rattled the door. 2 NYPD officers stood there, asking for me by name. My stomach dropped, certain some ghost from my past had finally caught up. But then one of them said they were actually looking for Melissa. Apparently there was a warrant for her arrest in another borough. They wouldn't give me much, just that it was serious and they needed to take her in. I told them she was in her room and asked if I could talk to her first, thinking maybe it would land softer coming from me than 2 uniforms. When I stepped into her room, she was cross-legged on the floor folding laundry. I said, "Melissa, there are cops here. They say there's a warrant for you." Her face drained of color. She shook her head, whispering, "No, no, no, not now. They just want to talk. Don't lie to me." Her hands trembled as she snapped, "They're going to take me in. You don't understand. I can't go back." I tried to steady her, told her if it was a mistake she could clear it up, but she kept muttering under her breath, "Not again, not again." When I reached for her shoulder, she snatched something from under the laundry pile, a knife. The cold edge pressed against my throat before I could react. Her grip clamped my shoulder tight, pulling me close. "Get up," she whispered, voice shaking but low enough only I could hear. I could feel my pulse hammer against the steel. "Melissa, what are you doing?" I said, forcing my voice calm while my chest thudded like it might crack open. "I'm not going back," she hissed, eyes darting toward the door. "You think they'll listen? No, they'll lock me away and forget I exist." Outside, one of the officers called, "Melissa Thompson, can you come out here, please?" She flinched. "Tell them to leave. Tell them I'm not here." "Melissa," I said slowly, raising my hands to show I wasn't trying anything. "There are 2 cops outside. If you move now, this only gets worse." Her jaw tightened. "It can't get worse." She began steering me toward the door, the knife biting harder against my skin. My mind spun. I'd fought to stay clean for over a year, to build something resembling a life. Now I was about to be dragged out as her shield. "Melissa, listen to me." "Shut up," she snapped, pressing harder until my skin pulled against the blade. "Walk." We stepped into the living room. The officers' hands hovered near their holsters the moment they saw her with the knife. "Put it down," the taller one barked. "Melissa, it doesn't have to go like this." "I'm leaving," she said, voice cracking. "You stay put while I walk out." "You're not walking out with him," the other officer said firmly. "Let him go, and we'll talk." She let out this dry, broken laugh. "Talk? You mean cuffs in the back seat of your car. I know how this ends." Her breathing rattled against my back, each inhale uneven. I kept talking because silence felt deadly. "Melissa, if you hurt me, that's it. They'll shoot." "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, almost like she was begging herself to believe it. "They don't know that," I whispered. Her grip loosened for a second, and I thought maybe I'd reached her. Then she muttered, "They'll be too busy saving you to chase me." My stomach dropped. "Don't do this," I started, but she cut me off, yelling toward them, "Stay back!" Her arm tensed, it all unraveled in a blur. One officer shouted, "Drop it!" Her hand jerked. I felt the tip graze my skin. Then a deafening crack split the air. The pressure vanished. The knife clattered to the floor. Warmth splattered the side of my face. Melissa collapsed beside me, eyes open but vacant. Blood spread fast under her head, soaking into the carpet. I stumbled back until I hit the wall, hands flying to my throat. A shallow slice, stinging, wet, but not deep. The officers surged in. One pulled me away, the other kicked the knife aside before checking her pulse. I didn't need to hear the verdict. The shot had gone straight through above her cheekbone. Voices blurred, radios crackled, my ears rang. The ghost of the blade still pressed against my neck. They sat me on the couch, asked if I needed an ambulance. I couldn't answer. I just stared at her. She looked smaller, curled on the floor like that. I remembered her sitting in the dark at 2 a.m., staring at the window. They told me it had been my life or hers, that she'd left them no choice. I nodded, but in my head I kept circling back to that moment in the bedroom when I told her about the cops. If I'd said it differently, moved slower, maybe. Her room stayed locked until her family came for her things. I didn't talk to them. What could I say? I found another place within a month. But sometimes in the middle of the night I wake with phantom steel pressing under my jaw, her breath hot on my neck, her voice whispering, almost apologetic. "They'll be too busy saving you to chase me." And every time I wish she'd chosen differently. Because even with the knife, part of me still believes she wasn't the villain she thought she was. I never imagined I'd end up sharing a flat in Manchester again. After my last relationship collapsed, I swore to myself that I'd live alone, at least for a while. I needed space, control, silence. But those kinds of promises don't pay rent. Manchester isn't cheap, and with my hours split between a part-time job at the print shop and picking up photography gigs whenever I could, money was stretched thinner than I like to admit. It was late September when I found the ad on Gumtree. The listing itself was short and no nonsense. Double bedroom available in 2-bed flat northern quarter. $430 per calendar month, bills not included. No pets, no smoking. Professionals or students welcome. I stared at it longer than I should have. The photos weren't flashy, but the place looked decent. Exposed brick walls, big sash windows, a small kitchen that at least looked clean. Nothing special, but not the kind of damp, crumbling place I'd been expecting in my price range either. The thing was, the ad had only gone up an hour earlier. I knew what that meant in this city. By tomorrow morning, the room would be gone. I hesitated only a second before sending a text. "Hi, I'm Daniel. Is the room still available?" The reply came almost instantly, too fast. "Yes, I'm Peter. You can view tonight if you're free." I glanced at the time, 6 p.m. I thought about putting it off until the next day, but the fear of losing it twisted in my gut. I grabbed my jacket and left. The building was tucked above an old music shop on Oldham Street. A battered green door opened into a narrow staircase that climbed into a dim corridor smelling faintly of varnish and something else. Metallic, sharp, but faint enough that I couldn't place it. Before I could even knock, the flat door opened. Peter stood there, mid to late 20s, slim, pale skin that almost looked underlit by the hallway bulb. His cropped brown hair was neat, but his eyes, icy pale blue, were too sharp, too still. He didn't smile. "You're Daniel?" he asked, his voice flat, almost mechanical. "Yeah, nice to meet you," I said, forcing some warmth as I held out my hand. He looked at it for a beat too long before finally shaking. His grip was cool, dry. The flat itself was tidy, too tidy. No clutter, no unwashed mugs left by the sink, no jacket draped over a chair. It didn't feel lived in. It felt staged, like a showroom. "This would be your room," he said, leading me to the back. "South-facing window. Gets good light." The bedroom was nearly bare. A wardrobe, a bed frame, and a mattress still wrapped in crinkling plastic. "It's quiet here," Peter said, finally turning those pale eyes on me. "I keep to myself." That line sold me more than anything. I didn't want a flatmate throwing parties, dragging strangers in at 3 a.m., or leaving dirty dishes stacked to the ceiling. I wanted solitude, and Peter seemed like the type who'd vanish into his own life. "I'll take it," I said. By the first week of October, I'd moved my boxes and my photography gear into the room. The arrangement was simple enough: buy our own food, clean up after ourselves, pay rent on time. Peter said he worked nights at a data center. "Security," he explained, though he didn't elaborate and I didn't push. His schedule meant he was often gone when I was around, and when he was home, he kept mostly to his room. On paper, it was ideal. But there was something off. Nothing you could point at directly, just little things. The way he held eye contact a beat too long without blinking. The way he'd stand a fraction too close in the narrow hallway, as if testing how much space I'd give up. Or the way he seemed to appear in the kitchen silently whenever I was making tea. Never noisy footsteps, never a door creak, just suddenly there, watching, waiting for me to notice. One Thursday evening, I got off work earlier than usual. I unlocked the flat and stepped into darkness. The living room lights were off. Peter's bedroom door was shut. I dropped my bag by the sofa and started toward my room. That's when I saw it. My door, slightly ajar. Would you like me to continue this story past this point, or just keep rewriting section by section like this with the same word count? I always shut my door before leaving. Always. Seeing it cracked open made something inside me lurch. I pushed it wider. The first thing I noticed was my desk chair, pulled out, angled toward the bed as if someone had been sitting there watching. On the desk, my camera sat powered on. I kept that camera in its bag, zipped and stored in the wardrobe. The lens cap was still on, but when I touched it, the body was warm, recently used. I froze in the middle of the room, scanning. Nothing looked stolen. My books were in place, my laptop untouched. But it didn't matter. Someone had been in here. I walked to Peter's door and knocked. A muffled, "Yeah?" "Were you in my room?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. A pause so short it felt rehearsed. "No. My camera was out. Maybe you forgot." His voice was flat, almost bored, like he was correcting a mistake I'd made. "I didn't," I said, sharper than I intended. Silence. No explanation, no pushback. Just dead air. I waited, half hoping he'd say more. He didn't. Finally, I went back into my room, locked the door from the inside, and sat on the bed with my pulse hammering. I didn't come out until I heard the faint click of the front door hours later, when he left for his night shift. After that, I started noticing little things. My wardrobe door left open a crack when I was certain I'd closed it. The faint smell of my shampoo lingering in the bathroom on days I hadn't showered. At night, soft noises in the hallway outside my door, the slow scrape of socks on floorboards, the hush of movement that stopped when I held my breath. I tried to reason with myself. I'd had bad flatmates before, ones who snooped or borrowed things without asking. Maybe I was projecting old paranoia onto Peter. Then Sophie came over one Saturday. She'd brought a bag of groceries, and we cooked lunch together, then curled up in my room to watch a film. At some point, we both drifted off. When I opened my eyes, Sophie wasn't asleep. She was stiff beside me, staring toward the doorway. Peter was standing there. Not speaking, not moving, just watching. "Peter, what the hell?" I snapped, sitting up fast. He blinked once, slow, like a lizard in sunlight. Then he turned and walked away without a word. Sophie whispered, "Daniel, I don't like him." "Yeah," I said quietly. My throat was dry. Me neither. That night I was on my laptop searching listings, savings be damned. I couldn't stay. My gut was screaming. The next day, I told Peter I was giving notice. "When are you leaving?" he asked, eyes locked on mine. "End of the month." There was a pause. His mouth twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Shame. I was starting to get used to you." I didn't answer. The final week was unbearable. Every night I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes they stopped right outside my door. Once I swore I heard whispering, too soft to make out words. 3 days before moving out, I came home to find every light blazing. Every cupboard in the kitchen hung open. Peter sat at the table, eating cereal like nothing was wrong. I gestured to the chaos. "Did you do this?" He scooped another spoonful, eyes fixed on me. "Sometimes I forget to close things." His hand hovered with the spoon mid-air, milk dripping back into the bowl, but his eyes never moved off me. On my last night, I lined my packed bags against the door like a barricade. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of the doorknob turning slowly, deliberately. I sat up, heart thundering. "Peter!" My voice was barely a whisper. The sound stopped. Silence pressed against the walls. I didn't sleep again. When morning came, I dragged my bags into the hall. Peter was waiting in the kitchen doorway. "Goodbye, Daniel," he said, his tone almost mournful, disappointed. I walked out without replying. A year later, I ran into a girl I vaguely recognized from the building. She told me she'd taken my old room after I left. I asked her, half joking, how it was living with Peter. She looked away, her face tightening. "Did he ever watch you sleep?" I didn't know how to answer. I never really liked the idea of living with roommates, but in Denver, rent doesn't leave you with many options, especially when you're a college student barely scraping by. Back in the fall of 2019, I was in my junior year at Denver State University, crammed into a 3-bedroom apartment just off Fax Avenue with 2 other women, Emma and Lauren. The place wasn't exactly ideal. The floors creaked so much you couldn't sneak around at night without announcing yourself. The kitchen carried this faint, permanent smell of burnt toast no matter how deep we scrubbed or aired it out. And our living room, if you could call it that, had a sagging couch where the cushions never stayed in place, sliding off whenever someone sat down. It was far from perfect, but it was cheap enough to keep us afloat. And in Denver, that meant something. Emma was the social one. She had this restless energy, always going out, meeting new people, collecting friends from her classes, work shifts, or random encounters at concerts, and she almost always brought those people back with her. Lauren was the opposite. Guarded, thoughtful, deliberate about who she let into her orbit. I sat somewhere in between, careful but curious. That semester, Emma started dropping a new name into conversations. "His name's Zane," she said one evening, bursting into the kitchen with her usual whirlwind entrance. She dumped her bag on the counter and leaned against the fridge like she had news to share. "He's interesting." Lauren was at the table, hunched over her laptop, her glasses sliding down her nose. She didn't even look up when she asked flatly, "Interesting how?" Emma grinned, the kind of grin that said she was holding something back. "He's older, late 20s, I think. He's taking classes still, but that's because he's starting his own business, and he's kind of a big deal in the Denver cannabis scene." I poured coffee into my chipped mug and raised an eyebrow. "So, he's a dealer." "Not just a dealer," Emma shot back, waving her hand dismissively. "A very successful dealer. He's charismatic. You'll see. I think you guys will like him." I glanced at Lauren, who finally pushed her glasses up and lifted her head. "Is this a business connection?" she asked carefully. "Or something else?" Emma rolled her eyes and let out a sharp laugh. "It's not like that. He's just cool to hang out with, okay? Chill." I didn't push further. I'd learned pretty quickly that Emma didn't like fielding too many questions about the people she brought home. It was always easier to just wait and see for ourselves. About a week later, Emma announced that Zane was coming over for dinner. Lauren and I exchanged looks but decided to play nice. We didn't want to look like the judgmental roommates. So we pulled together pasta, garlic bread, and a basic salad. Simple, but enough to pass for a real sit-down dinner. When Zane finally showed up, I understood what Emma meant by charismatic. He walked in like he owned the air we were breathing, even though it was our dingy little apartment. He was short, maybe 5'4", with a wiry build and messy brown hair that looked styled to look unstyled. His smile was wide and practiced, but his eyes didn't seem to match it, like the expression stopped just shy of feeling real. "Ladies," he said smoothly, flashing that grin as Emma shut the door behind him. He inhaled deeply, then clapped his hands together. "Smells amazing in here." We gathered around our wobbly dining table, balancing plates on unsteady surfaces, while he launched into conversation. And he talked. "I played football at the University of Denver back in the day," he said, tearing into the garlic bread like it was the centerpiece. "Got injured, though. That's when I decided to start my own logistics company. Been running it for years now." Lauren glanced at me over her water glass, her eyes flicking quickly before she looked back down. "Oh, and I used to live in Dallas," Zane continued as if we had asked. "That's where my parents got the idea for my name. Zane Dallas Thompson. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" "Yeah," I said politely, though my thoughts were already drifting. "There's no way that's his real name." He didn't slow down. He bragged about how much money he made, how well known he was in Denver, how he could get into any club without waiting in line. The longer he went on, the more he reminded me of those guys who lingered around downtown bars, pretending they owned the place while hoping someone was watching. When he finally left that night, Lauren shut the door firmly behind him and stood there with her hand still on the knob. Her voice was flat, no hesitation. "I don't trust him." Emma rolled her eyes, tossing her hair like she was brushing off a gnat. "You're so judgmental." But the weight in Lauren's tone stayed with me. Over the next month, Zane became a regular fixture in our apartment. Sometimes he'd walk in with Emma after class, carrying himself like he already lived there. Other times he'd just show up unannounced, knocking twice before pushing the door open. Lauren and I mostly stayed quiet when he was around, retreating to our rooms or pretending to be busy. But we noticed things. The way he dodged personal questions, offering vague answers about his family that never matched up. The way his eyes never really rested, always scanning, measuring people like he was calculating something about them. One afternoon, Lauren came home with a strange, unsettled look. She cornered me in the kitchen while Emma was out. "I went to his place to grab some weed," she said, her voice low. "And guess who I found passed out in a chair in some random room? Emma, middle of the day, just gone." I blinked at her. "What do you mean, passed out?" She wouldn't even explain. I shook her awake and she told me to screw off, like I was the problem. Lauren's mouth tightened, her hands gripping the counter. And the weirdest part? He never mentioned she was there, like not at all. Just carried on like nothing was out of place. A chill settled over me. "What the hell?" "Exactly," she said. "It's off. Really off." We both agreed it wasn't normal. Something about him, about them, felt wrong. By November, Emma wasn't gushing about Zane the way she used to. She barely said his name. One night, I overheard her in her room, voice low and sharp into the phone. "He's pissed because I won't sleep with him." A week later, she told me she'd blocked his number. Her face was pale, her laugh brittle. "He's not who I thought he was," she admitted, like she was only just letting herself say it out loud. Then more pieces started falling into place. A friend of Emma's mentioned that she'd known him for years, except his real name wasn't Zane. It was Michael, and apparently he'd been engaged not long before. He definitely wasn't a student anymore. He'd just hung around campus, circling like a vulture. Lauren and I felt uneasy, but by the time the semester ended, it seemed like he was gone for good. Emma drifted away, and life pulled us all in different directions. 2 years later, in February 2021, I was living across town in a different apartment. Lauren and I still kept in touch, but Emma had slipped out of our lives completely. One morning, my phone buzzed with a news alert. A young woman had gone missing after leaving a popular campus bar. She was only 21, brown hair, warm smile. Her face was suddenly everywhere. 3 days later, another alert came. They'd found her body. My phone rang that same afternoon. Lauren's name lit up the screen. I answered immediately. "Do you remember what Zane's real name was?" she asked without even saying hello. Michael, I think. Why?" "Go look up the article. Now." I pulled it up, scrolling fast, and my stomach dropped. His mugshot stared back at me. Same sharp cheekbones. Same eyes that never smiled. Denver man arrested for murder of college student. The details made my skin crawl. He'd met her at the bar, lured her back to his apartment. At some point, things turned violent. He beat her, strangled her, stuffed her body into a large storage container. Then, like it was nothing, he ordered a rideshare, hauled the container to his great-grandmother's property hours away, and buried it. The police caught him quickly thanks to security cameras. But after his arrest, the floodgates opened. Dozens of women came forward, each with their own story. How he'd lied about who he was. How he'd made them feel unsafe. How he'd lingered around campus long after he stopped being a student, playing a role he had no right to. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every memory of him. Him at our dining table laughing too loud, him on the couch eating dinner, him watching TV like he belonged there. I thought about Emma, her limp body in that chair at his apartment, and my stomach twisted until I thought I'd be sick. The next morning I deleted my news app, but it didn't help. His face stayed burned into my mind. Some people, some monsters, you can't unsee. I never imagined that moving to San Diego would mean so many long, hollow nights. Back in late 2014, I was 24, broke, and stuck in that weird limbo where every day felt like I was just trying not to drown. I had a journalism degree from a state college in North Dakota, something that sounded respectable on paper but didn't open many doors outside of unpaid internships. When a friend from high school offered me a room in his apartment near downtown San Diego, I figured it was better than stagnating back home. That's how I ended up living with Dylan and his girlfriend Harper. Dylan worked long hours in construction, and Harper worked nights as a nurse, so most evenings I had the apartment to myself. For the first few months, that was perfect. I could spread out my freelance work across the kitchen table, blast music without headphones, and cook whatever I wanted without someone hovering. But eventually money got tight. Dylan and Harper sat me down one night and explained they were thinking of bringing in another roommate for the smaller spare room, just to help ease the rent. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of sharing space with someone new, but San Diego rent wasn't exactly forgiving, so I didn't fight it. A week later, we met Chris. He was polite enough on the surface, but something about him never quite clicked. Not in a way you could easily point out. He didn't smell bad or hit on Harper or do anything overtly wrong, but his conversations felt off. He had this habit of letting silences stretch just a little too long, and his eyes, dark, restless, would linger on your face like he was studying every twitch of muscle, storing it away. He said he'd moved down from Oregon after things didn't work out with his last apartment, but whenever Dylan tried to ask what that meant, Chris changed the subject. The first night he moved in, he carried everything he owned in with one duffel bag and a taped-up cardboard box. Dylan tried to joke about minimalism, but even Harper leaned toward me later in the kitchen and whispered, "It's weird, right? No furniture? Not even sheets?" I didn't see more than a couple shirts in that bag. 2 months in, little things started bothering me. I'd come home from late walks and find Chris sitting in the living room with the lights off. No TV, no phone, just sitting there like he'd been waiting. If I passed his half-open bedroom door, I sometimes heard faint scratching noises. Other times I caught low, fast muttering, like he was on the phone. but there was never the glow of a screen, and he never stopped even if I walked by. One Saturday night when Dylan and Harper were both gone, Chris knocked on my door around 11. His face was calm, but his eyes darted like they didn't match his voice. "You ever notice anything weird in this building?" he asked. I blinked, trying to gauge if he was serious. "Weird how?" He smirked, like he was already disappointed in my answer. "Never mind. You will." Then he shut his door without another word. By December, things were escalating. San Diego winters aren't brutal, but our old building held on to the damp and cold in a way that made nights feel heavier. One night, around 2 a.m, I woke to the sound of faint footsteps in the hallway. Thinking Dylan had just come home late, I called out, "That you?" The footsteps stopped. I got up and opened my door, but the hallway was empty. Dylan's and Harper's doors were closed and dark. Chris's door hung half open, but there was no light, no movement, just stillness. From then on, I started closing my bedroom door every night. The night everything went wrong started like any other. Dylan and Harper were out of town for her cousin's wedding, leaving just me and Chris in the apartment. Around 8, I was in the kitchen boiling pasta when Chris walked in. He was holding an old Polaroid photo, faded, its edges curling and soft like it had been thumbed through too many times. He held it up without preamble and asked, "You ever want to see something that doesn't make sense?" I laughed, trying to diffuse the weird tension. "What, like a magic trick?" But he didn't smile. His voice dropped into something colder. "Not a trick. A place." At first I thought he meant some bar or maybe one of those abandoned warehouses San Diego was full of. But his eyes didn't move from mine when he said, "It's here. Not in this apartment, below it. There's a locked door in the basement past the laundry room. You wouldn't notice unless you were looking. The key's hidden in the electrical panel." I should have shut him down right there. Said no, walked away, locked myself in my room. But maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the same restless, reckless curiosity I hadn't grown out of since I was a teenager. Either way, I agreed. The basement hit me with the smell of mildew and damp metal as soon as we pushed the door open. Chris led the way with a flashlight, the beam cutting across rows of rusting storage cages, half of them empty, half piled with old boxes that looked like no one had touched them in years. The concrete floor was slick in places, uneven in others. At the far end, behind a sagging shelf stacked with paint cans, was the door. Beige, painted the same color as the walls, as if someone had tried to disguise it. But the frame told another story, edges scratched raw like fingernails had raked against it again and again. Chris reached into his pocket and pulled out a small brass key. My stomach dropped. "Wait, I thought you said it was hidden in the panel." He didn't answer, just slid the key in like he'd done it before. The door groaned open and I braced myself for another storage room. Instead, the beam of his flashlight cut into a short hallway papered with peeling floral patterns that looked straight out of the 1970s. The air was heavy, stale, like stepping into a lung that hadn't taken a breath in decades. Along the hallway floor were shoes. Not pairs, just singles. Men's, women's, children's. Every one of them dusty, brittle with age. The hallway spilled into a living room, but it wasn't just abandoned. It looked frozen. Like whoever lived there had simply stood up mid-sentence and never returned. A coffee table sat in the middle with a cup resting on it. Dust had collected thick across the rim, but when I touched the ceramic it was cold. Not ancient cold, but recent, like it had been poured yesterday and forgotten. The couch sagged under crocheted blankets that smelled faintly of mothballs. Family photos covered the wall, faded images of a man, a woman, and 2 children dressed in late 70s outfits, stiff smiles frozen forever. In the corner, a dining table was set for 4. Plates still held scraps of food, hardened and mummified yet eerily intact, shapes recognizable even after decades. I whispered, throat dry, "What the hell is this?" Chris didn't answer. He just moved across the room, toward a closed door on the far wall. Without looking back, he said, "There's something you should see." I didn't want to follow, but my legs carried me anyway. Inside was a bedroom. The bed was perfectly made, a floral quilt smoothed across the mattress as if someone had tucked it in just that morning. Sitting upright against the pillows was a mannequin, life-sized, porcelain-skinned, dressed in an old-fashioned nightgown. Its glass eyes caught the flashlight beam and reflected it back, dead and sharp. The head was tilted just slightly toward the door. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. The hair on my neck prickled until it hurt. Why is that here? Chris didn't look at me. His gaze stayed fixed. His voice was quiet. "She's been waiting." That's when I realized he wasn't staring at the mannequin. He was staring at me. I backed toward the hallway, forcing a shaky laugh. "All right, whatever this is, I'm done. I'm not sticking around for—" Chris's smile cut me off. Too wide, too certain. They didn't leave because they wanted to. You feel it, don't you? That weight in the air, the wrongness. I shook my head, turned, and walked fast, almost running, toward the basement stairs. I didn't hear him behind me, but when I grabbed the handle of the door leading back into the laundry room, it wouldn't turn. Not locked, not jammed, just stuck, like something was holding it firmly shut from the other side. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing down the wallpapered hallway toward me. I pounded on the door until my fists screamed, until the skin felt raw, and just when I thought I'd collapse, the handle gave way. I stumbled forward into the laundry room, slamming the door behind me. When I looked back, there was nothing. No beige door, just an unbroken stretch of concrete wall. Chris moved out 2 days later. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. Dylan laughed off my story. Harper didn't, though. She admitted she'd always felt something was off about him. Even now, years later, sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear faint footsteps beneath the floor. And once, just once, I could have sworn I saw the faint outline of a beige door at the back wall of the laundry room. I don't go down there anymore. I never thought I'd end up needing a roommate again. For 3 solid years, I'd lived alone in my little corner apartment in Portland's Pearl District, a 1-bedroom tucked on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse. From the outside, the place still looked like what it used to be. Gray brick, steel beams, loading dock doors sealed up decades ago. But inside, it had this surprising warmth. The walls were painted a soft cream, the kind of color that caught the sunlight in a way that made mornings feel easier. Tall windows framed in black steel overlooked the Fremont Bridge, and from my desk in the corner, I could watch the curve of traffic sliding over the Willamette River like a slow pulse. The apartment wasn't flawless. In the winter, the pipes rattled in a way that made you wonder if the building was groaning against its own age. And there was always this faint, stubborn smell drifting through the halls, like someone was perpetually baking bread 2 floors down. But it was mine. Over time, I had stitched the place together into something that felt like home. The couch was a Craigslist pickup from a young couple moving to Bend. The dining table didn't match the chairs, but together they worked. Even my collection of mismatched coffee mugs had stories. One from a thrift store on the coast, one from a street fair Maya dragged me to years ago. Every piece had its reason for being there. That stability cracked in late July. It was a Thursday evening, hot enough that the concrete outside still radiated warmth as I carried myself up the stairs. I dropped my backpack onto the couch, went straight for the fridge, and pulled out leftover curry. The microwave hummed while I opened my laptop, absently clicking through unread emails. That's when I saw it. Subject line: lease renewal. Important update. My stomach tensed. I clicked. Dear tenant, we wanted to inform you that due to rising property taxes and market adjustments, the monthly rent for your unit will increase from $1,850 to $2,200 effective September 1st. I reread it once, twice, 3 times. Each time the number, $2,200, lodged itself deeper in my chest. Technically, I could afford it, but only by cutting out everything that made my life feel like life. No savings, no weekends with friends, no little indulgences like takeout or trips back to see family. Just existing, paycheck to rent, trapped in the very apartment I loved. I called my sister, put her on speaker while I paced tight circles in the kitchen. "I think I'm going to have to get a roommate," I said, trying to sound less desperate than I felt. Maya's laugh cracked through the line. "You? A roommate? You're the guy who has a meltdown if someone shifts your keys 2 inches to the left." "I don't have a choice," I shot back. "It's either that or I move. Then move. I can't." My voice sharpened, more defensive than I intended. "I've built everything around this place. The light here in the mornings, the coffee shop on the corner where they know my order. I don't want to start over." She sighed in that older sister way that always made me feel 10 years younger. "Then at least find someone who won't drive you insane. Take your time. Trust your gut." The next day I swallowed my pride and posted an ad, photos of the apartment, details on rent, a couple sentences about me. I kept it plain, nothing flashy, just honest. I didn't expect much, but by the following morning there it was waiting in my inbox. "Hey, I'm Alex. Saw your post about the apartment. Your place looks amazing. Would love to chat." We set up a FaceTime call that night. When the window opened, a man's face filled the screen. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Dark hair trimmed neatly, wire-rimmed glasses perched low. A calm voice that carried an odd steadiness. He said he was moving from Sacramento for an accounting job downtown. He didn't ramble, didn't overshare. Instead, he asked careful, thoughtful questions about bus routes, about noise levels, about the neighborhood vibe. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing to set off alarms. He smiled in this small, measured way that felt almost studied, but genuine enough to settle the unease in my stomach. We talked for maybe 20 minutes before I said, almost without realizing it, "You should come by, see the place in person." That Saturday, he showed up right on the dot, knocking at exactly the time he'd promised. He wore a gray hoodie, the hood half pushed back, and carried a reusable grocery bag with what looked like a notebook peeking out from the top. His handshake was firm, practiced, his eyes scanning the apartment in one smooth glance before he smiled and said, almost too easily, "This is perfect. If you'll have me, I'm in." It all happened faster than I expected. Within a week, the lease had been updated, keys exchanged, and Alex was moving in. His belongings were modest, a few cardboard boxes stacked neatly against the wall, a thin mattress rolled out on the floor, a small desk that looked like it had seen better days, and one scuffed suitcase. No clutter, no excess. It was as if he'd edited his entire life down to essentials before arriving. The first couple of months passed almost too smoothly, as if I'd somehow lucked into the ideal roommate situation everyone else only dreamed of. Alex was clean, but not in a way that made me feel self-conscious. Quiet, but never cold. He had this habit of cooking simple meals that somehow filled the apartment with warmth. Pasta tossed with roasted vegetables, miso soup with scallions floating like tiny green rings, stir-fries fragrant with garlic. And he always slid the pot toward me with a casual, "Want some?" Sometimes, after work, we'd crack open a couple of beers and settle on the couch, conversations drifting from work stress to the quirks of the city, to whatever book he had cracked open that week. I pieced together parts of his life during those nights. He'd grown up in Fresno, studied finance, spent 5 years in Sacramento. He didn't seem to date much. Had a handful of close friends he called every so often, voices I sometimes overheard muffled through his bedroom wall. We weren't best friends. Not yet. But cohabitation with him was startlingly easy, like falling into a rhythm you didn't know you were missing. In late November, over dinner, he pushed aside his plate and said, "I need to head back to Sacramento for a few weeks. My dad's having heart issues and my mom's overwhelmed. I should help out." "Take all the time you need," I told him. And I meant it. He nodded, lips twitching into the ghost of a smile. "I'll try to be back before Christmas." The day he left, the apartment seemed to deflate around me. No soft clatter of him making coffee in the mornings. No garlic-scented air drifting from the kitchen. Even the hall light pooling across the hardwood felt different without his presence moving through it. 3 weeks later, a text buzzed my phone. "Back on Friday. Can't wait to be home." When he walked through the door, I felt my stomach drop. He looked thinner, alarmingly so. His hoodie sagged, the sleeves bunching loosely at his wrists. His face was sharper, his cheeks hollowed, his eyes darker or maybe just deeper, like shadows had settled into the sockets. "You okay?" I asked carefully. "You look like you've been through it." He gave a small laugh, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, long couple of weeks. I'll be fine." We cooked dinner that night, but something was wrong. His timing and conversation felt off, like he was half a beat behind. Jokes we'd shared before landed flat. Sometimes he just tilted his head as though he didn't remember them at all. His laugh, when it came, was quieter. Over the next days, more details unsettled me. His walk was subtly altered. Shorter steps, almost cautious. His voice seemed a shade lower, like someone speaking from a deeper register than I remembered. And the tiny mole under his jawline, the one I had noticed countless times during our casual conversations, was simply gone. One night I went to bed around midnight. I closed my bedroom door, made sure I heard the latch click. But when I woke, it was cracked open an inch. I told myself I must have been careless until it happened again the following night. Then, 2 nights ago, at exactly 3:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured, deliberate. They stopped just outside my door. I lay rigid, holding my breath, every muscle wired. The air felt thick, heavy, pressing down on me. After what must have been a full minute, though it stretched like an eternity, the steps shifted, turning toward the living room. In the morning, Alex was at the stove, brewing coffee as if nothing had happened. "You get up last night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He paused, just long enough to make my skin prickle, then shook his head. "No, slept straight through." Now I'm sitting in my car outside the hardware store, hands still trembling. I'm here to buy a lock for my bedroom door, because whatever came back from Sacramento, I don't think it's Alex.